Take Command is the latest book released by Dale Carnegie. The book features leadership stories from our podcast guests, as well as young up-and-coming professionals. Published by Simon & Schuster, Take Command is co-authored by Joe Hart and Michael Crom. Visit takecommand.com for more details and to buy the book. Remember to subscribe and review our podcast on your favorite listening platform. Now, to our latest episode.
Welcome to Take Command, a Dale Carnegie podcast, the show where we seek to uncover what leadership means in today's world. I'm Joe Hart, CEO of Dale Carnegie, and we will be talking to diverse leaders with stories to tell across various industries to help unlock your potential for success. We will be sharing real-life insights into leadership, which in turn can help spark the next level of your growth as a leader. Our guest today brings a wealth of global experience as an executive at one of the world's leading manufacturers, marketers, and distributors of musical instruments. With a background spanning over 19 countries, he connects cultures across the Americas, Europe, Asia, and beyond. His endeavors resulted in his company's largest acquisition of PreSonus Audio Electronics and the support of the $1 billion California Proposition 28 Music and Arts Education Ballot Measure. Alongside his professional pursuits, he is deeply committed to modernizing the legal system and generously volunteers his spare time to refugee foundations offering pro bono legal assistance and mentoring. Please welcome General Counsel, Executive Vice President, and Corporate Secretary at Fender Musical Instruments Corporation, Aarash Darroodi. Aarash, welcome to the Dale Carnegie Take Command podcast.
Thank you so much, Joe. Such a pleasure to be here.
It's great to be with you. And you and I had connected originally. We both have a love for Dale Carnegie. I know you're a Dale Carnegie grad. You've had this incredible career so far, and you've still got a lot of career left, being the general counsel for Fender, this iconic instrument company, guitar company, leading in so many different ways. So just really excited to have you with me today. I know I've got a lot that I and our listeners will learn from you. One thing that jumped out, I know that you were raised primarily in Iran, but you also, as I understand it, lived in or visited 35 countries by the time you were 7. Tell us about that.
Absolutely. Really very much a victim of circumstance. So I was born in Houston, Texas. Both of my parents were from Iran, and they were students studying chemical engineering at the University of Houston. And their goal was to go back to Iran. At that time, before the revolution in 1979, Iran was an unbelievable country to live in. So many times the youth would be sent abroad to the United States and Europe, and they would receive their education and then go back to Iran. Well, the revolution happens. And you had 2 young students who were my parents in the middle of Texas. They were on student visas. They couldn't afford to provide for me. They couldn't get jobs. And so they decided to not go back to Iran, but to send me to Iran with my grandparents for a period of 6 months so that my parents could stay in the US, get their visas, establish a life and a home, and then summon me back. Now, I was born in the US, which means I have a US passport, US citizen. I could go back and forth as I please.
You were how old? This is before 7.
I was 6 months old when I went to Iran.
Okay.
Yep, 6 months old, and I get to Iran. A few months later, all-out war breaks loose between Iran and Iraq, and I actually got stuck in Iran for 7 years, and I didn't see my parents until I was 7.
So that must have been terrifying. You were with your grandfather, you said at the time.
Correct. Yep.
So how did you end up going to all these different countries?
Yeah, so near the end of the war, as the war was inching ever closer to a peace deal in 87, 88, the borders opened up in Iran and gave the opportunity to folks to go to different countries on tourist visas. Well, we took advantage of that opportunity. And so we went to many, many countries with the hopes of getting my passport reinstated and getting a visa for my grandparents so that we could come back to the US. We would go to a country, we would camp out, ready to be called by the embassy, only to go to the embassy and get up to the front desk and told, sorry, nobody's giving visas to Iranians. And then we would go all the way back to Iran. So this was repeated over and over the course of a year and a half.
So as you reflect on that experience, especially at such a young age, how did that shape you?
It absolutely shaped who I am today because, in essence, I grew up very quickly. I mean, there's this one story that I always share with folks, which is it was like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and we got awakened by the sound of what seemed like 1,000 fireworks going off at the same time. And so we rush outside, and 3 houses down where we were living was completely destroyed. And the boy that lived in that house was my playmate. That was the one that I would play with as a kid. When you see these experiences as a child, what it does is that it wakes you up to the world and it makes you stronger. And it sort of instills this notion within you that life is not all about candy canes and lemon drops. There's a seriousness to it. However, hope is a very powerful thing. I learned hope, that I always hoped I would find my way back to the United States. I would find my way to my parents. And ultimately, I did.
You found your way back. You grew up in the United States. Talk a little bit about what happened after that, because I mean, ultimately, I know you went on to become a lawyer. Was that something you aspired to do when you were young, or how did that come to pass?
No, it sort of came on its own after I read a book. So somebody had given me a book entitled Barbarians at the Gate. This was a book that covered the RJR Nabisco leverage buyout of the 80s. I just found this book fascinating, Joe. The fact that there were these lawyers and they were working on these M&A deals, I never knew that lawyers could do things this exciting. And really, as I read through the book, it was almost like a roller coaster ride. That was the initial excitement that I got from it. And then later on, a movie came out in HBO called Barbarians at the Gates based on the book. And I totally fell in love with it. And I said, that's the path I want to go in. I want to work for the M&A world. And that's what I want to do. And so I went to law school.
I know you're a Hoya at Georgetown. My father went to Georgetown, great school, one that's got a lot of affection for me. But did you then go into that, or what did you do after law school? Because you didn't go right into the LBO world, I don't think.
No, I didn't. And that's where really the interesting thing about life comes in, where a lot of times you can plan, but life has something else in store for you. So both my parents are accountants. There was this enormous pressure on me to make sure that I get my accounting degree and get my CPA, and being a good son, that's what I did. I got my accounting degree, got my CPA, went to law school. After law school, got a master's in law and taxation. My goal was to be a tax attorney and work on M&A deals. I came out and it was 2006. There was a real estate crash, which was followed up by 2008 financial crash. The economy was just terrible. And there was definitely plenty of lawyers out there. So I had difficulty sort of landing those positions that I truly, truly was passionate about. And I ended up getting a job as a tax attorney working for a fairly large insurance organization based out of Silver Spring, Maryland. And that's how my career started.
So many times, especially people who are younger, but really people at different stages of their career have a vision for how they want their careers to go. You know, life often will throw us a curveball, so to speak. How did you feel when you were in that role? I mean, did you embrace it and say, hey, look, I'm going to make the best of it? Did you say, I'm going to keep on, looking? But what did you do, and what was your mindset as you took on that role?
I was highly appreciative of the opportunity because at a time where the economy was so challenging for so many people, it provided me sustenance. However, I wanted something more entrepreneurial. I wanted to be involved in a setting that was innovative and driven by creativity. And so what I did was I decided to connect to human beings, which is a theme that you and I will discuss throughout this podcast, which is connecting to humans. Behind every company, any deal, any government institution is just a regular human being. And so what I would do, Joe, is I would go to local happy hours in the DC metropolitan area, hoping that I would stumble upon meeting somebody that may perhaps have an opportunity for me. Well, I did that for about 6 to 7 months and nothing happened, but I was persistent. I didn't give up until one day I met somebody. And the person was part of a private equity firm that had 13 technology companies, and they were all growing very, very quickly. And he loved my background, an attorney and a CPA. We need you. We want you. All I said was, sign me up. I'm ready. Whatever it is, I'm ready to go. And so that's where my next job came in.
Well, it's interesting too, though, because sometimes we look at people who are successful and maybe we see what we perceive to be a linear path. You really took command, so to speak. You went out and you said, I need to do something. I'm going to be proactive. You didn't make excuses and so forth. That desire driven by action was what put you in that situation to find that opportunity.
100%. I always say that we should always push ourselves into uncomfortable spaces. The reason why is only through those challenges that we become stronger, which is one of the reasons why we started the story out about sort of my early childhood and the separation and such. I always get this question as to, did your parents ever regret it? If anybody could do anything different, would you guys change that trajectory? And my response is absolutely and utterly no. It was those difficult experiences growing up as a child separated that built me as a human being. And it's the same thing with your career and skill sets. As long as you just accept everything that you currently have, you'll never grow. Always go forward and up.
Yeah. Have you always had this mindset, or is this something that you've kind of developed over time?
I think it came from my childhood. I mean, you have to understand, Joe, living in Iran as a 6-year-old, every movie we watched came from the United States. Every music we listened to came from the United States. And then add to it, on top of it, that your parents are in the United States. You're always striving. And I learned to always strive for that one goal. That got in my mind from the time I was a child, and it stayed in there even after I got reunited with them.
It's great that it did, and it's great that you were able to develop that mindset. I can't help but think, though, also, we go through hardships in life. I mean, growing up myself, I had asthma, and it was a really, really rough childhood. I'll talk to my mother about that and how that really helped me develop strength. You know, for you, being apart from your parents and being with your grandfather and living through all that you did gave you strength, but also because you had the right mindset around it. I mean, we can go in a couple different directions when we face difficult situations, but you chose to embrace it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It ended up becoming my competitive advantage. Many of the skills that I learned during those formative years, going from country to country, trying to find a way back to the United States, I learned a lot about the world. I learned a lot about different cultures. And to think that 30 some years later, I would end up working for a multinational organization that I'm tapping into a lot of those things that I learned as a child and those cultural nuances that I picked up everywhere from Asia to Middle East to Europe. It's invaluable.
So what advice would you give to people who are in the midst of a challenging situation, right? Sometimes when we have perspective afterward, we could say, okay, well, I've grown as a result of this, but there are people who struggle with all kinds of things, whether it's job loss or illness or loss of a loved one. I mean, for those people who are listening right now who are struggling with something, what advice would you give them about resilience and around mindset?
I would say that fundamentally, whenever you find yourself in difficult situations, identify what the problem is. Try to utilize resources that are available to you. Each of us has certain resources that are right in front of us that we don't even realize that they're there. Figure out what you are good at. Fundamentally, everybody is good in something, really good in a particular thing. Figure out what that is. Then utilize those resources, stay positive and hopeful, and you will find your way out. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. Connect to humanity, connect to other humans. They will be the ones that ultimately help you and shape your life going forward.
Yeah, I mean, if you do that, if you connect with other people, you stay positive and hopeful, you can get through just about anything. Before we go on, and I certainly want to talk about your experience at Fender and also how you really have a view of the law and that, how it needs to change and so forth, and how people can really excel in their careers as lawyers, but also for those who are listening who are not lawyers, advice for people how they can excel in their careers. But just to go back, you are a Dale Carnegie graduate. Mm-hmm. And I know that one of the things that was formative for you was your experience taking that program as a young person.
Yep. I was a summer intern. This was the first year of college for me. And a family member of mine actually worked for Dale Carnegie in the DC metropolitan area and was kind enough to help me sort of get my very first summer internship. And I'll be completely frank with you, Joe, I had no idea what Dale Carnegie was. All I knew was this is an established organization and it would just be great to be able to work there in the summertime and make some extra money. I ended up learning so much about not only Dale Carnegie, the person, Dale Carnegie, the organization, and the courses that they offer, but I also had the pleasure of taking one of their courses, which as a summer intern, it came complimentary, which was fantastic. It completely and utterly changed my perspective on business, human-to-human relations, and my complete outlook. I guess the course got to me at such a young age, at 18 years old, that it awakened me to things that otherwise I probably wouldn't have encountered until maybe a decade later in the real world.
And how did it do that? What was what your experience was?
The course was fascinating in the sense of you had a lot of business professionals from the local area attending the course. It was a night course. And being in the room with all of these professionals, what I realized first and foremost was the fact that everybody had a challenge they were trying to overcome. And everybody wanted to better themselves. They wanted to learn additional skills that was going to let them be successful in their organizations. And one of the most important skills that is a fundamental function of the course itself is public speaking. The ability to be able to stand in front of individuals and convey your ideas, your story, whatever it may be. This was something that the course emphasized. I went in as a shy 18-year-old. I came out of that course as a bull out of the stalls. It melted the shyness away from me, something that served me even to this day. As we speak here on this podcast with you, that was a pivotal moment, was really shedding the shyness and the ability to convey ideas.
It can be powerful when you start with one perspective of yourself. You see yourself as shy, and then you find yourself in front of the room giving a talk or connecting with people. And all of a sudden you say to yourself, well, I had no idea I could do this. And that just creates a level of confidence. And I know, you talk about human connection being kind of foundational in terms of how you lead. And certainly want to talk about your leadership at Fender and how you are negotiating and interacting with people throughout the music industry and so forth. So that's an important part of maybe that foundation that helped you set. But how did you get to Fender? Tell us a little bit about that.
Complete serendipity. Again, you can make plans, you just don't know what's around the corner. So as I mentioned, I was going to various happy hours. I did meet a gentleman that worked for a private equity firm that had 13 different ad technology companies. I ended up working with them several years. They grew like a weed. And they were a tech company. So I learned the language of technology, and I learned how to work with millennials and Gen Zers and programmers, domestic, international. And so we were buying a company in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I was stationed out of Scottsdale, Arizona for about 6-7 months doing the due diligence on this acquisition. And I did the acquisition. We did the post-merger integration. And a recruiter from Fender one day reached out to me out of the blue on LinkedIn and said, "We see that you're here in Scottsdale. We love your tech background. Would you be interested in interviewing?" I thought it was a scam. I said, why would Fender, the most iconic guitar company, perhaps even music company, be in Scottsdale, Arizona? That makes no sense. So I quickly did some fact check and realized, oh no, yes, they have a massive presence in Scottsdale. And this was exactly at the time that Fender was investing hundreds of millions of dollars in growing their digital presence, and they didn't have an attorney that spoke the language of tech. I happened to be in the right place at the right time. I interviewed and I was hired literally the next day.
And again, when you explain it, it sounds so simple. And yet what strikes me is all of the things that you did to lead up to the recruiter finding you, the way you had networked, the way you had positioned yourself. I mean, having that kind of awareness of opportunity and being present for it in the marketplace.
I think ultimately, there's a fog of war, as we say in life, where you can't really see that far ahead, right? However, what I always fundamentally believe in is if we take our learnings that we've had through life, which in essence, I think they're invaluable, take those learnings and really listen to your gut to tell you what makes sense as far as the next thing. For me, I knew if I didn't go and network and meet those people in those happy hours, I probably wouldn't have been able to find the next opportunity. Afterwards, I knew that tech was the place to be. So in the early 2000s, I emphasized learning anything and everything about technology and learning the language of tech. And I did. That ended up serving me well. It's been something that's helped me throughout my life and continues to do so as we currently speak as well.
Well, you are now in a position where the General Counsel of Fender, and by the way, for people who aren't familiar with this company, I mean, this is, as you said, probably the most iconic maker of guitars in the world. Jimi Hendrix, George Harrison, Jeff Beck, Bruce Springsteen, all these classic musicians have used Fender guitars. You probably met some pretty incredible people, I would think, in your position.
I have met Bruce Springsteen, Billy Joel, Billie Eilish, David Gilmour, the list goes on and on. Really, really incredible people.
So what is your role at Fender? Talk about what it means to be the General Counsel at Fender.
Sure. So, as General Counsel of Fender, I manage the entire legal operations of the company globally. So, we are very much a global brand. We manufacture, employ, and sell globally. We have operations in Asia, Australia, EMEA, Central and South America. It's a very complex organization. Folks look at a guitar and they sort of think, well, this is a fun product. How complicated can it be? There's about 3,000 rules and regulations that govern one single guitar. We're taking raw materials as far as trees, and we're cutting them down. We're shaping them into these instruments, applying glue and paint, and then selling them across the world. It is very, very complex from a legal perspective. What I truly love about the organization is that it doesn't just have a culture, it has a soul. There's an element to this organization that for me personally is really, really valuable to me in the sense that it represents America. It represents a part of American history and American culture. And to think that an Iranian immigrant would ultimately end up being the protectorate of that from a legal perspective across the world, provides a lot of joy to me personally.
Well, it's inspiring that you have this opportunity and that you're leading in this opportunity. You continue to lead and innovate. One of the things that connects to this is your leadership. When I talk about leadership for a little bit, because human connection is something that you discovered at an early age, something you cultivated through the Dale Carnegie course, through your career. How does the human connection impact how you lead, your leadership philosophy, how you interact and lead other people?
I'm going to bring it back to that course that I took when I was 18 years old. So this is a multi-week course, but there was one particular segment that involved a lady who was probably in her mid-40s to late 40s. And she shared this very, very powerful story about her life, which included her being sexually assaulted as a teenager. And imagine you're 18 years old and you're sitting in this room with everybody who's significantly older than you are, who are business professionals. And me sitting there and hearing this story from a person that I didn't expect would ever share anything like that in front of everybody, it opened my eyes that everybody has a story. The stories may be good or bad, but in the end, they are the stories that have shaped them as people. Now, keep that in mind. I was hiring a corporate paralegal to sort of serve me on the legal department. Paralegals in the legal world essentially assist the lawyers. They're sort of like the nurses to the doctors. I hired her. She came from an incredible organization. And about a year and a half into her tenure in the organization, I turned to her and I said, I got to ask you a question. You're so brilliant. You got a logical mind and you're solving these problems as if you're a lawyer. Why didn't you ever go to law school? She turned to me, Joe, and she said, well, I lost my mom to breast cancer when I was 13. It had a profound impact on me and my father was very, very nonchalant, so really didn't get much direction from him. And now anyway, it's too late and it's going to cost too much. It's just not going to happen. And I asked her, I said, can I ask you a couple questions? And she said, sure. I said, where was your father born? She said, what? I said, just tell me, where was your father born? Claremont, California, somewhere in there. I said, okay, where was your grandfather born? In a town in Pennsylvania. I said, so you guys are German, Dutch German? She's like, how'd you know that? I said, just work with me here. Where was your great-grandfather born? My great-grandfather was born in Germany. When did he come to the United States? In the late 1800s. I said, well, let me get this straight. You're telling me that your great-grandfather got on a wooden boat, a boat made of wood, and trekked one of the most treacherous oceans on the face of the earth, which is the Atlantic Ocean, came to the United States, did not know the language, learned the language, earned a living, had a child who had a child who had a child, which is you, and you can't go part-time to law school? Joe, she took the LSAT, she got a scholarship, she finishes next year, she becomes the first attorney in her entire family's history. So to answer your question, everybody has a story. When you connect to humanity, what you realize is that those stories bring a lot of life learnings. And there is a lot of power that's locked up within people that they feel that they should hide it away and not embrace it. I fundamentally disagree. I think you embrace it because those are where the learnings come from.
Is that something then you apply as part of your leadership philosophy? Is that something when you're engaging with people, you're looking for those stories?
100%. If we are doing an interview, which we're actually doing as we speak, there's 2 positions I'm hiring for. I just don't want to see the resume. I'm impressed by the resume. That's fantastic. I want to know the story. What were some of the challenges you faced in your life? How did you overcome them? What did you learn from those challenges? How do you think those challenges will help you in the future? That's valuable. That's what I want to see. I want those people, the ones that have overcome difficulties and challenges.
Well, it's great that you ask, you look to connect to people on that level. What I have found is that when we take time to care about other people, when we take time to ask and to listen, to appreciate, to respect, that's a critical part of leadership. There's this great quote, which is an older quote, but it's people don't care what you know till they know that you care. So taking the time, and the example you just gave is one where you helped this woman really unlock her greatness, do something she maybe didn't have the confidence to do. And we have the opportunity to do that with people with whom we work constantly.
People are more capable than they themselves know. Not what others sort of assume how capable they are, but people themselves. A lot of times we need somebody to see that within us and push us, and then we can achieve greatness we never thought possible.
So how do you apply this when you're dealing with difficult people or you're dealing with a negotiation? As you mentioned, the process of creating guitars, selling guitars is very difficult. A lot of the contacts you may have in the music industry, there might be, difficult negotiations. So, it's one thing when you're working with someone who's doing a great job. How do you apply this in situations that are maybe a little harder?
I'll give you an example. My predecessor in the organization tried very, very hard to negotiate a very difficult deal with Universal Music. Universal Music is the largest music publisher and record label in the entire world. It was unsuccessful. The negotiations fell through, everybody went their separate ways, and ultimately my predecessor left the organization and I became General Counsel. I reached out to the individual that was responsible for negotiating on the Universal side. And I said, I would love to set up a Zoom call with you for 30 minutes. He said, okay, fine, but you know that these negotiations have already fallen through. I said, no, I understand that. Just want to set up a Zoom call. So we got on a Zoom. The gentleman was expecting me to come in and start negotiating. I said, I don't want to speak about a single provision within the contract. I don't want to talk about business terms. I just wanted to meet you. He said, meet me? I said, well, yes, I'd like to meet you and hear who you are and how you got to where you are. And if you're interested, I would also like to share with you who I am and how I got to where I got to. About 2 hours and 45 minutes later, we had created this connective tissue that didn't exist. We ended the call, no business terms were discussed. A couple of weeks later, that deal was negotiated, it was finalized, and we became partners with Universal. Again, it's these strategies of being able to connect to human beings. Don't look at humans as representatives of entities. Look at them as regular, flawed beings, if you will, that are just trying to find their way through their lives, and show that you care and hear their story. And hopefully that starts a path towards what you're trying to achieve that's mutually beneficial to all.
That's terrific, Aarash. At the end of the day, we all want to work with people that we respect and that we like. And that's true both in a work environment as well as in a negotiating environment and so forth. So, clearly when we take time, and this is something we teach clearly in Dale Carnegie about listening and respecting, letting the other person do a great deal of the talking, we value that person, and then you can develop a relationship. And so often it's those relationships that enable things to get done, just like the example you just gave. Beautiful.
Yeah. Actually, Joe, you just remind me of something else that, again, I took this course many years ago, but something that came to mind was one of the things that Dale Carnegie teaches is when you're speaking, try to remember names. Number one, which shows that you care. Number two, try to smile when you're speaking. Try to create a sense of perception where people want to speak with you and want to like you. These are really fundamental things that we sort of assume, no. How are these things going to be useful in the real dog-eat-dog world? I am here to tell you that they are responsible for bringing me to where I am in my career. It's these things. It's these sort of ancillary tips and tricks and strategies that are super, super valuable.
Yeah, it's interesting because these are often, we'll say these are common knowledge. The idea that you smile or you look at someone or you talk and so forth, the way that you just described, might be common knowledge, but it's not always common practice. Our natural tendency is often to get into something that's contentious or to be defensive or to criticize or whatnot, but to be patient and to apply these things over time can be really critical. So this is maybe a good time to ask you, generally I'm asking questions, and as we talk, it's a two-way conversation. We're just going with the conversation. Yep. But before this interview, I went to ChatGPT and I explained that I was interviewing you for the Dale Carnegie Take Command podcast. And I said to ChatGPT, what's the one question you would ask Aarash? I think you've answered it to some degree, but I'm going to go ahead and give you the question, and I'm going to give you ChatGPT's follow-up question. So throughout your career, you've achieved remarkable success while also prioritizing people and fostering collaboration. Could you share a specific example or story that exemplifies how your people-first approach has contributed to both your personal growth and the overall success of Fender?
First of all, that's so exciting that you went to ChatGPT. I find that really, really cool. For me, these positions, such as Executive Vice President and General Counsel of Fender, is more than just a position of power. It is a position that equates itself to being a vehicle for change. I love the ability to make a positive impact in the lives of my employees. When I became General Counsel, I was the first General Counsel in Fender's history, in 77-year history, to hire the first female attorney, first African-American attorney, first Asian-American attorney, first Native American attorney, LGBTQ attorney, veteran attorney, and disabled attorney. In the end, you never know where the road of life takes you, but fundamentally, I'm going to be most proud about that, the way that I impacted the lives of these individuals. Which again, if I create an environment that's healthy and happy and people are growing, they're going to work incredibly hard, which then I also benefit, and the organization benefits, and the employee benefits, and the ecosystem benefits. If you try the opposite of it, everything gets hurt. Nothing works and nobody really benefits from it. So yes, that's what's important to me.
Well, it is true when we focus on other people versus ourselves. I mean, sometimes you get people who are self-serving and they're just focused on themselves and what they want. That gets a certain kind of result. But when we focus on other people and bringing out the best in others, then we create something that is X times 10, X times 100. And we do it in a way that really respects them. So the follow-up question for ChatGPT was, what specific strategies or practices do you implement within Fender to foster a culture of collaboration and empower your team members? So when we talk about culture development, it's one thing in terms of, say, those individual relationships, but when it comes to developing culture, what are some strategies that you employ?
A couple of things. I took the historical hierarchy pyramid and I shattered it and I flattened the pyramid. So most of the legal departments, and for the most part, most organizations, the way that they're structured, there's an individual typically at the top, and the pyramid starts to get bigger as you come down. What I found throughout my career working in different companies was there is an authority bias, where in essence it says that because somebody has a higher title than another person, automatically whatever the higher title says has to be correct. That's authority bias. It's common throughout. I said, I'm not going to accept that. So I shattered the hierarchy. We have titles because titles equates to compensation. But what we don't have is we don't have somebody above somebody else. All of the lawyers, whether they are experienced mid-level or entry-level lawyers or senior paralegals, or admins and coordinators, are all on one plane. This allows them to be able to share their ideas in a very comfortable environment where they don't feel like they're speaking out of place. Well, what that does and what it's done for me is that it's created a happy environment where people share their ideas, and the paralegals and the coordinators and everybody else actually work significantly harder because they feel valued. So the lawyers benefit, the department benefits, I benefit, and the organization benefits. So that was one strategy that I implemented. Strategy number two is we're a global company. And I love that about Fender. I love operating on the global scale because it presents so many competitive opportunities. We go through cultural trainings. So all of my employees have to go through Japanese cultural training, Chinese cultural training, Australian, every market that we are operating in, we go through professional cultural training courses. Why? Because if we go out into the world and assume that the world will and has to engage with us and negotiate with us in accordance with the American ideals of business negotiations and business norms, we're going to find ourselves in a very, very difficult situation because the way you negotiate with Japanese colleagues is very different than you do with German colleagues. How about we take the initiative to learn? And that becomes our competitive advantage. There's that piece. And then lastly, I was giving a speech on this topic. Gen Zers. Gen Zers are very, very different. They are different than millennials and baby boomers. This is a generation that will fundamentally be the next work population of the United States. But they're different. They think differently. If we try to engage with Gen Zers the same way that we've done since the 1940s and 50s, where the basic tenets of corporate governance and sort of management comes from, it's not going to work. We have to find another way to engage with Gen Zers. Whether we like it or not, they're the future, and we just have to figure out another way. And so I do that. I try to engage with Gen Zers in a way that allows us to be successful with this next generation.
Well, it goes to this idea. I love that you said, how about we learn? How about we take responsibility? And it's easy to look at somebody else and to say, well, you're the problem, right? Or you need to change, or you need to do this. But really, when we try honestly to see things from another person's point of view, when we understand, then we can build bridges, and then we really can work more effectively. And this is one of the biggest things I see as I travel around the world. People will complain about intergenerational conflicts. Whatever the generation that we're in, that's the right generation, and everybody else is the wrong one. So how do we get them to come on the program and say, well, wait a second, what's our responsibility in this? That's taking command, really.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. They are the future. We have to learn how to work with them.
How would you define leadership?
I would define leadership as the North Star. So what I always try to tell my individuals is figure out what your North Star is. What is it that you want to achieve in your life? You should have a goal. You should have a purpose. And it's okay if you haven't figured out what that is, but I think you should consciously think about it. And me, in my position, my role is not to carry you there. My role as a leader is to guide, advise, and try to help you achieve and reach where your North Star is. And everybody is different. I mean, there are individuals that I have on my team that tell me, I would one day love to be the general counsel of a company. Others say, I would love to be the head of nonprofit organizations. Great, fantastic. So during this time and period that you're in this organization and I am your leader, I'm going to do everything that I can to help at least get you closer to whatever that North Star goal is of yours. So I see it more as a guide. That's how I see leadership.
A guide or a coach or someone who can help bring out the best in other people and to align them to that vision. So it's a vision that they have, a vision that you have. But there's no doubt that when we work together with people, bring out their best, we can accomplish things far more than we could by ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
As you look back on your career, I mean, you're someone who is constantly learning and thinking and improving. And, certainly you've got kind of a vision maybe for your future. I'm curious, as you look back over the years, what advice might you give to a younger version of yourself?
I would probably say, learn to learn. Learn the power of learning, putting yourself in a constant state of discovery, meeting new people, learning about new ideas, whether they're exciting or scary, whatever they may be, whether it's technology or societal changes, and learn how to learn. Because in the end, people have a lot of value to provide. How many folks really take the time to go learn from other individuals? Not often. We're so caught up in our world and our lives and such, but there's so much learnings. I've had such amazing mentors throughout my lifetime that have completely shaped my life. I don't remember the hours of conversations. I remember punch words, punch lines, like sayings. I remember those, they're etched in my memory and served me to this day. So learn how to learn.
Yeah, it's great. When we find learning as an objective, it can redefine how we see things like failure. If I look at failure as I'm trying to achieve something and I don't succeed, that's a narrow definition of failure. And it keeps a lot of people from trying things. They're afraid. On the other hand, if I learn to learn, it's all right, well, this didn't work out the way that I thought. What can I learn here? Then that really contributes to a growth mindset that can propel us forward.
Yeah, myself, I don't believe in failure. I believe in learning. In essence, those are learning moments. When I was in law school, I decided to create a beverage company out of nowhere. It was like this creative energy that I had. So I went down to the local Whole Foods store and I asked them, do you have a relaxation beverage? I would love to have a beverage that I could just open up in school and drink and relax. And the gentleman said, no, we don't have anything like that. Ding, the light bulb went off in my head. And being a proud capitalist that I am, and I decided to create it. I had no experience in manufacturing. I had no experience in creating a beverage. But again, utilize the resources that are available to you and learn how to learn. So I learned how to make a beverage. I worked with a company that formulated the flavor. I worked with a company that helped me manufacture it and ultimately created 24,000 cases. I didn't have a distributor, so I would wake up in the morning and go out and do distributions myself to Whole Foods. It went from one Whole Foods store all the way up to 120 Whole Foods stores from New York down to Florida. No investment money, just my idea and me being able to learn how to learn and implement those learnings. It ultimately didn't succeed because Coca-Cola came in and purchased a competitor and ran sort of our distribution down. But the things that I learned there, Joe, in that experience, MBA graduates didn't learn. I learned about negotiation, retail, marketing, advertising, sales, design, anything you can think about, from getting an idea to selling a product in a retail store in 120 Whole Foods stores. I learned it. I got my MBA. So it was not a failure. It was a tremendous learning moment that even to this day, I apply those learnings.
It's interesting. It goes back to that conversation we were having a little bit earlier, which is if we are in a moment and we look at a particular thing, we may see it that way. But if we have that broad, open mindset, that growth mindset, then we really can benefit from it. Speaking of growth, you've got so much of your career ahead. You've already had a brilliant career. What are you most excited about as you think about the years ahead?
I think it's technology. I'm super excited about the technology that we're starting to see emerge, whether it's artificial intelligence, machine learning, Web 3.0, blockchain, and quantum computing. How will humanity be able to adapt to these technologies? And how will we implement them? You know, I remember going back to the summer internship that I had at Dale Carnegie. This was just as the internet was starting to take shape and sort of find its place in the world. And I remember specifically, like Dale Carnegie, my responsibility was figuring out what domain names are and how we get domain names for Dale Carnegie. Like I remember this. So that was the emerging technology. And then look at it now. You guys do courses through the digital realm and things of that nature. So that's what I'm most excited about is technology. And then probably second to that, globalization. The fact that the world was connected, now it's heavily interconnected. And I think it's really exciting where it's going into the future. Because as a manufacturer, the smallest component from the most obscure province in China has a profound impact on our manufacturing facilities. It brings it to a complete stop if we don't get that one component. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, there is this interconnectedness. We certainly saw it over the pandemic with supply chains and so forth, and that will get better and better over time, but we are connected and that's not going away.
Yeah.
Aarash, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Any closing pieces of wisdom for our audience?
It was such a pleasure to be here. I would leave everybody with this notion that connect to humanity. Let it power your engagement with people through empathy, and you'll unlock incredible opportunities for yourself in the future.
Terrific. A great way to close. And thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you.
In today's Thought Leadership Spotlight segment, our guest highlights the core value of aligning actions with goals by applying one of the Dale Carnegie principles. If you're wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically. Like Aarash, our guest emphasizes the importance of having a clear vision and evaluating the contribution of actions to achieving that vision. Please welcome president of Dale Carnegie of Arizona and Colorado, Ken Beiersdorf.
A phrase that kept going in through my mind as I was listening to Aarash tell us his vision and where he was going and the path that he went is what I am doing or about to do going to contribute to the success of my goals. One thing that I do remember so much from Aarash is that he was determined. He was willing to recognize areas to further pursue and where he needed to regroup and go off in another direction. It reminded me of an opportunity I had several years ago running an organization, and I wanted to venture off on another path of opportunity for the business. As we were going down, it felt like I was pushing that rock up the hill. And finally, I became so tired of pushing the rock up the hill, I sat back and I looked at the data points. They weren't going to be getting any better. It was opportunity for me to recognize one of Dale Carnegie's principles again. When you're wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically. It gave me the opportunity to sit back and recognize that it wasn't a failure. Failure would have been continuing to try to push that rock up the hill. Instead, I was able to regroup, go down another path, and achieve what we were trying to achieve. So I challenge each and every one of you, have a vision, and then ask yourself, is what I am doing or about to do going to lead to the success of that vision?
Join us and order a copy of Take Command in hardcover, ebook, or audiobook format at your favorite bookseller or at takecommandbook.io. Also, you can visit takecommand.com for more information about the book and additional resources. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Take Command, a Dale Carnegie podcast. Check out our resources page at www.dalecarnegie.com for more research, insight, and tools that will support your success in taking command of your leadership potential. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating it and subscribing to us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. As always, thank you for listening, and we look forward to you joining us for the next episode of Take Command, a Dale Carnegie podcast.